Welcome to cooking cheap, easy, and tasty meals. Today I'm going to make my Mamaw's pralines. It's a family recipe, but I imagine a lot of people make the same thing. It's a Karo praline, which a lot of people would not do. They would use brown sugar instead, but this one has Karo, which helps, I think, keep it from crystallizing. Now I'm also using golden sugar. Now golden sugar retains just a little bit more flavor than plain sugar. I don't think it's dramatically different, but I've always used it when I can find it in this recipe. We start off with 2 cups of white sugar. Now to that we are going to add, and if you remember from previous recipes, I usually take a cup and spray it with cooking spray before I add anything sticky to the cup to make it easier to pour. Now with the temperature like it is, nothing is going to be really easier to pour right now. The house is cool this morning, so it may take a minute. This is corn syrup, so half a cup goes in here. And after you've sprayed it, does seem to come out a little easier. Honey and maple syrup and things like that seem to do better when you spray the measuring cup first. Then a half cup of milk. Now I've used skim, 1%, 2%, and whole milk. I can't tell any difference. And then we're going to use a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, not baking powder, baking soda. I guess the same reason you add baking soda to other dishes. So stir it up. Now, normally you would add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, but because I'm using salted butter, I am not going to add any more salt. When you make this recipe, if you find that the sweetness is too intense, add just a little more salt and that might help you. The next step to cook it to soft ball. So we're going to turn it on to about medium. One of the key things when you're making these pralines is to take your time. Don't rush. Let it cook for a long time and you'll get a much better flavor. I'm using an old-fashioned candy thermometer. We're going to cook it to soft ball, which if I remember right is 243 or so. My mother could have cooked these without using this. I'm sure my grandmother could have. I think my mother always used the temperature gauge just because she felt like she should. She's a home ec teacher, and so she felt obligated to teach people how to do things the right way. Now this is going to take a while. I'm just going to let it cook. Now you'll notice as the temperature rises on this, the volume will increase. That's the baking soda making it expand like this. You need to keep an eye on it and stir it. Now I had it on medium heat. I turned it down a little bit because I didn't want it to cook quite this fast. But on this induction cooktop, it really cooks quickly. You do want to stir it occasionally to make sure it doesn't burn on the bottom. Notice how creamy it looks. It's coming together really nicely. That's exactly what it's supposed to look like. Now what'll happen is, as it does this, it's going to begin to brown a little bit, the sugar. It's going to caramelize the sugar a little bit, and you're going to notice a flavor and color change. When I first started making these, well, sometime after I started making these, I would stop and take a sample about every 15 or 20 degrees just to see what the difference is, and the texture and the color change so much and the flavor changes so much over time. It's really amazing. This is extremely hot. Do not get this on you or on anything that's fragile, because this hot sugar syrup is extraordinarily hot and will do some damage. I am going to put pecans in these pralines. I'm going to use some large pecans, and I'll leave a link to where the pecans came from because I think it's one of the best pecans I've ever found. It's a producer up in Monroe, Louisiana, that has really nice pecans. It's called Double P Farms, and I'll leave you a link to them. Pecans are not cheap, but they are tasty. Notice how it's starting to become more brown. It's gone from white to kind of a light brown. And I have it down at just below medium. I slowed it up a little bit, so it's giving it some more time to caramelize. I am not going to roast the pecans before I put them in here. When you put the pecans in there, they are going to be cooked pretty quickly because the mixture is going to be so hot. But this is the size of the pecans I'm going to use. They're really nice sized pecans. And on their own, they taste really great. One thing I've found about the candy thermometer is you'll get something behind it, so you need to move it every now and then and stir. It's really liquid and it sloshes easy, so be careful. Having been burned by a couple drops of this in the past, I'm sensitive to the burn factor. Now, this is just a single batch, and this is my largest saucepan. You can see how much space it takes, because it will bubble up. When you stir it, the volume will go down a little bit as it lets some of the air out, but you do need to keep an eye on it. Okay, we're at about 215 degrees now. Still got a ways to go. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes, and you'll notice it's still getting darker. Slow cooking will make them darker and darker. We're up to about 224 degrees. So it's really slowly rising, I'm assuming, as the water boils off of the mixture. Whatever chemical reaction is going on, but it is definitely caramelizing. You can tell by the color that it is. I grew up, my mother made these, my grandmother made these, my sister, my brother makes them. Everybody made the same recipe, but I have an aunt who for some reason never made this, just didn't make this recipe. She made a brown sugar version of it, which I'm gonna see if I can make, just to see what the difference is, because I've never done it. But this one is so simple, it just takes time. I think the Karo makes sure that it almost always comes out perfect. There's not a time where you go, it didn't work, because it pretty much always works. Okay, we're getting close. We're at 238 degrees, I would say. So we're almost there. Stir it real quick. Notice how volume is about half of what it was at its peak. Well, maybe 2/3 of what it was at its peak. But it's got lots of little bubbles, and it's really a lovely shade of brown. We're 3 or 4 degrees away. Okay, we are there. So I'm going to turn off the heat. We're going to go to the next phase of this. Notice how it diminishes really quickly when you turn off the heat. Everything is hot. Notice how what a beautiful, rich, caramelly looking color that is. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add half a cup of salted butter. And of course, it doesn't have to be room temperature, because actually you probably want it to be cold to help cool the mixture, because you have to cool it to a certain point before you can lay it out as pieces. Then a tablespoon of vanilla. You may want to use less vanilla. I always use that much. I'm going to go ahead and get this butter to melt. Stir the butter in. What we're eventually going to do is we got to stir this until the mixture starts to thicken. And it'll take a while for it to cool to that point. So first thing, we're going to get the butter in, and then we're going to add the pecans. And that'll be the last ingredient to the praline. Okay, we're getting them there. Butter's almost melted. You could cut it into pieces, and it would probably melt faster. This is still extremely hot. Be careful with it. A little bit of butter left. There we go. Okay, now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add pecans. So these pecans are cold. I'm going to add 3 handfuls. That's probably 2 cups. You can add as little or as many or none, because pralines by themselves are pretty good. If you want to use it for something where you mix the praline candy itself without the pecans, just don't use the pecans, and stir it until it cools. And then take the pieces out. I usually take them out at about a tablespoon at a time. But what you'll notice is right now it's very shiny. As it begins to give up that sheen, that's when you'll know it's ready. The luster will start to fade. Now, if it cools too much, you can always put it back on the burner for a minute or two and warm it up. Just remember to keep stirring it to do that. But it's better if you just keep an eye on it. What'll happen if you pull them out too early is they'll just spread too far. They'll be just soft and sticky. So, again, we gotta let them rest for a little while. My mother would have stirred them until they got to that point, but I'm lazy, so I'll let it sit for a minute here and there. Certainly don't have to use whole pecans. Use pieces. I've tried them with other nuts, but the pecans taste right in them. Everything else, pistachios and walnuts, just don't taste right. Probably because I was raised with pecans being in pralines. The truth is, I didn't like pecans most of my life. Early on, I had to pick pecans up, and I just hated pecans because I had to. So I missed out on a lot of pecan pies and a lot of pralines with pecans, but my mother always made me some that didn't have pecans in them. So she was always kind about remembering that I didn't like pecans, although she thought I was crazy, which is probably true. Once I started eating pecans, I saw what I'd missed. By the way, as this cools, it's going to get really thick. It's going to get harder and harder to stir. Just keep at it. Make sure you have a strong stirring utensil. My mother probably would have used something similar to this, although she might have used a wooden spoon too, occasionally. I'm not sure I remember her having wooden spoons. She must have had something similar though. And when she made it, she would have made a double batch. She would have used a bigger pan and cooked a double batch if she was going to go to the trouble of making it. Makes sense. I've broken spoons in this trying to stir them, so it really gets pretty thick. Not there yet. When they're ready, I'm going to take a piece of parchment paper. You could use wax paper, and I'm going to lay them out on that. Now, notice that it's starting to change. Now, it's still shiny, but it's starting to cool a little bit, luster diminishing. I don't know if you can tell that or not, but it is beginning to diminish a little bit. Take one out and lay it here and see what it does. Not quite ready. Close. It'll probably set now. Yeah, you can really see the change now. It's cooling. Stir it a little bit more. It's getting really thick. Okay, let's see about taking some more out. Now, because of the price of pecans, putting that many pecans makes this a pretty expensive piece of candy. So you can use fewer pecans and use pieces. Make it a little less expensive. The pecans really make them taste better. Although it's hard to beat a praline no matter what's in it. And as these cool, it's going to get easier to pick them up. They'll become a solid piece and they won't be such a problem. They won't be as soft as they are now. I think my sister and brother probably do this better than me. They've done it a lot more. I just do it a few times at Christmas. But I do it as a memory. I really like them too. But there's a lot of memories associated with pralines. It's one of those foods that you had every year at a certain time and with a certain group of people. And it was always something you appreciated. People may have differences at holidays about the world in general, religion, politics, whatever, but they don't have much when it comes to pralines. They pretty much all agree on that. And that's a good thing. They have something in common with each other, that it doesn't make each other mad. It seems like that's the running joke all the comedians do, is talk about how bad it is at Christmas at home. And I understand it. I had a few Christmases that weren't completely pleasant in my youth, but mostly my fault, so it's all right. Now, we've still got quite a few pralines that we can get out of here, so I'm going to get another piece of parchment paper and pull these kind of up to the top. They do taste good. Let's see if I can't get the rest of these out of here. Let's see. We've gotten down to the ones that won't have very many nuts in them. So, those are special. Now, obviously, you can make these larger or smaller. I don't think I'd make them a lot larger, but you can certainly make them smaller. I'm going to probably give these to my neighbors and send some to family members that are out of town or something that may not do them for themselves. But overall, these are going to go pretty fast. And I'm going to try not to eat any. I'm going to try not to eat any. Don't know how well that's going to go. I really shouldn't eat any. And as a kid, this would have been the part I wanted right here, the pan. I think I probably want it now too. Anyway, you're starting to see they're becoming more firm. Pretty soon they'll cool to the point where you can peel them off and put them in a box or put them in a package and give them to somebody. Anyway, that's pecan pralines, my Mamaw's recipe. And I'm going to try this other recipe, which I think is my wife's father's recipe, a little later. Hope you enjoy it. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and give us a like. Thank you.